Come with me today as I try a new body butter recipe. I will show you how I do this start to finish, including me making the labels and how I handle any possible mishaps. First, I start off by making a double boiler. In not so fancy terms, that's just me bringing a pot of water to a boil and then placing a bigger bowl on top. This is what we're going to use to melt the shea butter and the coconut oil. Now, I buy my shea butter in a 50-pound block from Bulk Apothecary, and this is what it looks like. I just kind of break off pieces on that block with a knife. But I make and gift so much with the shea butter that I require a lot more of it. If you use a lot less shea butter, I would suggest buying a 2 or 5 pound block. For this recipe, I'm going to use 2 cups of shea butter. And to do that, I just cram as much shea butter into a measuring cup as I can. And it's probably not going to be a full cup, or it may be a little more than a full cup. Either way, these recipes are usually pretty forgiving, and I typically don't stress the amounts too much. Next, I'll be adding a cup of coconut oil. Again, it's the same process. I just cram as much of that coconut oil into a measuring cup as I can and then plop it into that bowl with the shea butter. For this next part, we are just going to let the both of those melt. For time's sake, I sped this part way up, but in real time, it took about 5 to 10 minutes for all of that to melt down. And I chose this method over microwave because I read that the microwave could zap some of those nutrients. While that finishes melting up, we're going to add our liquid oils. For this part, you can use avocado oil or olive oil. I like avocado oil because I prefer the benefits and the smell. And for this part, I just used an entire cup. I added it to the bowl of my stand mixer. And then I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of jojoba oil. It's great for anti-inflammatory properties as well as moisturizing. Now that we can see that these oils have completely melted down, let's get ready to put them into the bowl as well. Since I don't have a fancy double boiler, I'm going to transfer that glass bowl to a towel so I can dry all that moisture off the bottom and the sides. I'm doing it this way so when I pour it into the mixer bowl, none of that water drips into my oil, which could lead to mold or this going rancid much faster. But now that that's dry, we're going to go ahead and add it to our avocado and jojoba oil and give it a good stir. Now you can leave this at room temperature until it starts to solidify, but I put mine in the freezer to speed that process up. And just from experience sake, you don't want it completely solid. You just want it to start hardening around the edges. This is after 40 minutes in the freezer, and I would still like for it to be a little more hard, so I'm going to throw it back in. And while that's in the freezer, I'm going to get my containers ready. These are just 8-ounce containers off of Amazon, and I'll try to link all of this in my LTK for y'all. But they are perfect for body butters, and I think they even offer white caps if you prefer. I know this recipe is going to use somewhere between 4 and 6 of these containers depending on how whipped it gets. Now that it's more solidified, we're going to start the whipping process, and that's just using the whisk attachment on your stand mixer at a higher speed. I also go ahead and add my essential oils here, and I usually use about 30 to 50 drops, and I chose vanilla essential oil for this recipe because I think it'll complement the coconut oil very nicely. Now for the possible mishap. The oil spent 40 minutes in the freezer before I started whipping it, and I got scared because it wasn't really thickening, so I threw it back in the freezer for about 20 more minutes, and that seemed to do the trick. Throughout the mixing process, you'll kind of see me put my hands at the base of this bowl, and that's just me making sure that the bowl stays cold, because if that bowl starts to warm up from the mixing, you will never get it to whip correctly. I whip mine until it reaches a thick lotion consistency because it's easier to pour into the containers when it's a little bit runny. But as it sits in these containers, I promise it thickens up. But if you get it too thick before you put it into the containers, you're running the risk of having big air pockets inside the butter. And I'll show you at the end when this thickens up what I'm talking about. But this ended up filling 4 jars, which is exactly what I needed for some gifts that I'm giving to some friends that are expecting. I swear by shea butter and stretch marks. I used shea butter all throughout my pregnancy and never got a stretch mark. And let me tell you, I gained some weight when I was pregnant. And I had a little left over for a small jar for myself. Next, I cleaned up the outside and put the lids on. Now, I use Canva for all of my label creations. I'm going to use a 3-inch by 2-inch label for this. So that's what I put in my measurements here. And within Canva, you can play around with the different fonts. They have a free version that has tons of fonts and elements that you can use for your labels. If y'all would like a more in-depth tutorial, just let me know in the comments. Since I've made body butter in the past, I already had a label created, so that's what I'm going to use. I highly recommend a thermal label printer because the ink doesn't smear, which is perfect for body and bath products. And I always love how these labels turn out. And this was the final product, so let's get them on the jars. I don't have a fancy way of getting these labels on here straight, so I basically just wedged the jar between my stove and my cutting board, which holds it pretty steady and allows me to get that label on there as straight as possible. And remember I said trust the process because this recipe turned out exactly how I wanted it to. With normal whipped body butter, you kind of have to work it to get it into your skin. And since this is going to my pregnant friends, I really didn't want anything they were going to have to work extra hard at because I know they're already tired. It's not liquidy or runny at all. It still has a very whipped texture to it, but it rubs in so smoothly. I'm genuinely obsessed with this texture. I tried to get the camera angle perfect so you could see that it's still kind of whipped, but it's still very lotion-like consistency. Oh, and the vanilla and coconut together is absolute chef's kiss. It smells very sweet and beachy. Okay, what should we make next?